air in the chamber was thick with tension, the kind that makes every breath feel heavier, every whisper sharper. And then it happened. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, eyes unwavering, voice steady yet electric. With a single sentence, a single line carved out of equal parts wit and conviction, she cut through the noise like a lightning splitting the sky. For a beat, no one moved. Silence gripped the room, the kind of silence that feels alive, buzzing with shock. And then, like the crack of a dam giving way, the chamber erupted. Gasps first, then laughter, then thunderous applause that refused to be contained. Reporters' pens froze mid-stroke. Cameras zoomed in, desperate to capture the moment. Even those who had come expecting nothing more than another dull political exchange felt their hearts race as though they were witnessing history in real time. In a single moment, silence shattered into roaring applause. Who was she, this congresswoman with the sharp tongue and unshakable presence? What exactly had she said that could turn arrogance into stunned silence and cynicism into standing ovation? People leaned toward their screens, replaying the clip, mouthing the words, feeling the jolt of satisfaction that only comes when truth finally lands a clean hit on power. It wasn't just a clap back. It was something more, something bigger. Because Jasmine Crockett had done what so many had longed to do. She had spoken in a way that made the powerful tremble and the people cheer. Her line wasn't just clever. It was devastating. It was surgical. It was the kind of moment that made strangers text each other. Did you see that? The kind of moment that doesn't just belong to politics. It belongs to pop culture, to identity, to the collective imagination of a country craving authenticity. As the cheers echoed and Kash Patel sat frozen, the ripple began. Phones lit up, hashtags formed, clips spread like wildfire. And yet inside that chamber, in those first seconds after the words were spoken, none of that had yet unfolded. What the crowd felt, what America would soon feel, was only the spark. But to understand why this one line shook the room, we need to rewind.
The chamber wasn't just another room that day. It was an arena. Polished wood gleamed under the lights, microphones waited like loaded weapons, and every chair was filled with eyes that carried expectation. This wasn't ordinary business. This was a hearing designed to test more than just facts. It was about trust, about whose version of America would stand taller when the dust settled. Every detail added weight to the atmosphere. Cameras lined the walls, lenses unblinking, ready to capture every flicker of expression. Aides shuffled nervously, whispering brief reminders, clutching notes they knew might never be read. The public gallery buzzed with anticipation, an audience hungry for drama, yet unaware how much of it they were about to get. What hung in the balance wasn't simply the outcome of testimony, it was credibility, truth itself, the fragile bond between the people and the institutions meant to serve them. And then, the villain made his entrance. Kash Patel walked in with the confidence of a man who had worn arrogance like a second skin. His stride was deliberate, his smirk carefully measured, as though the very act of being questioned was beneath him. He shook hands with allies as if already victorious, nodding at familiar faces, his posture radiating the smugness of someone who believed the show was his to control. Patel carried himself like a man rehearsing for applause that hadn't come yet. The way he adjusted his tie, the casual lean in his chair, even the faint grin that tugged at his lips whenever an opponent spoke, it all broadcast one message: untouchable. To him, this hearing was nothing more than another stage, another opportunity to dismiss, deflect, and dominate. But what Patel didn't see, what he couldn't see, was how the room itself had shifted. Behind the quiet faces and polite decorum lay frustration, a hunger for honesty that arrogance could no longer drown out. Every exaggerated smirk he flashed was fuel for that fire. Every shrug, every chuckle, every dismissive roll of the eyes only pushed the audience further toward impatience. Jasmine Crockett watched silently. She measured him the way a skilled fighter sizes up an opponent, looking not at the showmanship, but at the weaknesses hiding in plain sight. Where others saw confidence, she saw cracks. Where others saw untouchable swagger, she saw an opening begging to be exposed. The stakes kept climbing with every passing minute. This wasn't just Patel's chance to dodge accountability. It was a test for the entire system. Could arrogance once again slip past truth, or would dignity finally demand its moment? America was watching, and the crowd in the chamber could feel the weight of that gaze. Patel smiled wider, his voice booming with self-assured deflection. His answers dripped with the kind of charm meant to impress cable news clips, not the citizens who had grown weary of spin. He thought he had control, thought he had the room in his palm. But control is an illusion, and arrogance blinds faster than darkness. Little did he know, his downfall was only minutes away. To understand the tension that rippled through that chamber, one must first understand the man at its center, the figure who walked in believing himself invincible. Kash Patel was not a stranger to controversy. His name had long been whispered in Washington circles, often followed by raised eyebrows or heavy sighs. He wasn't the kind of operator who built bridges. He was the kind who lit them on fire and strutted across the ashes. Patel carved his reputation in the shadows of power, orbiting those who thrived on spectacle and loyalty over principle. His alliances weren't forged on shared values, but on shared ambitions, cemented by backroom deals and a taste for provocation. To his supporters, he was a warrior willing to say what others wouldn't. To his critics, he was arrogance embodied, a man whose swagger came not from moral courage, but from knowing how to play the game dirtier than anyone else. His career had been a parade of theatrics. He knew how to spin narratives, how to twist a headline, how to turn accountability into victimhood. Again and again, Patel positioned himself not as a servant of truth, but as its self-appointed gatekeeper, deciding which facts mattered, which didn't, and who was allowed to speak. And when cornered, he rarely admitted fault. Instead, he leaned into bravado, puffing up his chest, sneering at opponents, dismissing their questions as beneath him. It was this arrogance that became his brand. Patel seemed to relish in being underestimated, turning every challenge into an opportunity to display contempt. He smirked at journalists, rolled his eyes at colleagues, and cut off critics with the casual cruelty of someone who believed power was permanent. He projected untouchability, convincing himself that swagger was the same as strength. But behind the curtain of confidence were the cracks. Those who worked closest with him knew the truth. His calm often faltered when pressed too far. His smirk could wobble into a grimace. His booming voice sometimes slipped into stammers. For all his talk of control, Patel was a man whose greatest fear was losing it. And beneath his arrogance lay a gnawing insecurity, an awareness that his power was borrowed, dependent on proximity to louder, larger figures who shielded him from consequences. Still, Patel had mastered the art of the performance. He wore arrogance like armor, trusting that if he projected enough certainty, the world would mistake it for conviction. And for a long time, it worked. In hearing after hearing, appearance after appearance, Patel strutted away unscathed. He had trained himself to believe that no opponent could pierce his veneer, no adversary could disarm his smug certainty. This is what made him dangerous, not because he carried the truth, but because he carried the illusion of it. And illusions are sometimes enough to sway the undecided, to cloud the air with doubt, to make dishonesty feel like strength. He embodied everything people hated about political gamesmanship, the smirks, the evasions, the theater that mocked the very idea of accountability. And yet, this was also what made him vulnerable. For when arrogance becomes predictable, it also becomes a trap. When someone is so certain of their own untouchability, they rarely see the blow that's coming. Patel was a master of playing defense against the obvious, but blind to the subtler attack that could unravel him completely. That day, as he sat in the chamber, arms crossed, smirk painted across his face, Patel was convinced he was watching another routine performance. He thought he had already written the script, that the audience would once again leave frustrated while he left triumphant. But arrogance is its own undoing. Every word he dismissed, every question he waved away, every smug laugh he let slip, only pulled the crowd closer to longing for his unraveling. Patel believed he had faced it all before: angry journalists, frustrated lawmakers, skeptical citizens. He believed he had already proven he could outlast anyone who dared to confront him. But Patel had never faced someone like Jasmine Crockett.
Before Jasmine Crockett's words echoed through that chamber, before her one-liner shook the room into gasps and applause, there was a story of grit, persistence, and the kind of fight that doesn't begin in marble halls, but in the everyday struggles of life. To understand the power she carried into that moment, we must rewind not to headlines or hearings, but to the roots of who she is. Jasmine Crockett's journey was never one paved with entitlement. She didn't inherit influence. She built it, brick by brick, through nights of study, days of work, and years of standing in rooms where she was never expected to belong. Raised with the understanding that the world would test her twice as hard for daring to be both unapologetically black and unapologetically bold, she developed a skin that could withstand the sharpest barbs and a voice that could cut through the loudest noise. Before politics, she was a lawyer, a defender of those who couldn't afford sleek firms or expensive representation. She took cases others passed over, representing the marginalized, the ignored, the ones society preferred to silence. In those courtrooms, she didn't just argue the law, she argued humanity. She learned that truth doesn't always speak for itself. It needs someone brave enough to carry it into the light. Each client she stood beside wasn't just a case number, they were a reminder of why she fought at all. Her rise into politics wasn't born of ambition for power, but of frustration with systems that seemed designed to fail ordinary people. When leaders ignored the communities that raised her, she decided to step into the arena herself. Campaigning wasn't easy. Doors were slammed, funds were tight, critics questioned whether she had the polish to play the game. But Crockett wasn't there to play. She was there to disrupt. Every speech, every rally, every handshake was charged with the fire of someone who had lived the struggles she spoke about. And people noticed. They saw in her not the scripted politeness of career politicians, but raw authenticity. She didn't pretend. She didn't filter herself into something safer or more palatable. She spoke the way people spoke at kitchen tables, in barbershops, and late-night phone calls where frustration spilled over. Her bluntness was her gift. It cut through cynicism like a blade through fog. That authenticity became her armor and her magnet. Supporters gravitated toward her because she seemed fearless, because she refused to bend her words to fit someone else's comfort. Critics called her fiery, confrontational, too much. But for every critic who dismissed her, there were dozens of ordinary people who finally felt seen, finally heard. She became a voice not just for her district, but for anyone who had ever felt silenced by power. And hearing after hearing, her reputation grew. Crockett didn't flinch in the face of condescension. She didn't soften her words when addressing those who dismissed her. She developed a rhythm, a way of speaking truth so directly that it left opponents fumbling, grasping for composure. She didn't need theatrics. Her presence alone was enough. Where Patel leaned on arrogance to shield insecurity, Crockett leaned on authenticity to reveal strength. And yet her fearlessness wasn't reckless. It was forged from experience, from a lifetime of being underestimated, from constantly being told to wait her turn. She knew what it meant to walk into a room and feel eyes question her right to be there. She knew what it meant to carry not only her own voice, but the weight of countless others who had been ignored. Every barrier she broke wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. By the time she walked into the chamber that day, Crockett carried with her years of scars and victories, failures and triumphs. She carried her community, her courtroom battles, her campaign nights, her speeches, her silences. She carried the lessons of knowing that power only respects those who refuse to bow to it. This is what made her so dangerous to someone like Patel. His arrogance thrived on opponents who shrank back, who treated him as untouchable. Crockett didn't either. She had weathered storms far greater than a smirk. She had faced dismissals more cutting than an eye roll across a desk. Patel's games were nothing new to her. And that day, she was ready. Because her life had prepared her for this exact moment, the moment when truth would collide with arrogance, when authenticity would stand toe-to-toe with pretense, when years of being told she couldn't would explode into one unforgettable line that proved she could. The audience watching may not have known her whole story, but they felt it. They felt the weight behind her words, the conviction born not from ambition, but from survival and purpose. They didn't just hear her clap back, they heard the echo of every fight she had ever fought to get there. And as Patel leaned back in his chair, smirk still painted across his face, he had no idea that the person seated across from him wasn't just another adversary. She was the culmination of a journey, a force sharpened by struggle, ready to pierce through the performance he mistook for strength. The stage was set. The hero had entered. And Patel's arrogance was about to meet its match.
The hearing moved forward, but the air inside the chamber seemed to tighten with every passing exchange. What had started as routine questioning was morphing into a battle of wills. On one side sat Kash Patel, leaning back in his chair, lips curled in a permanent smirk as though he were watching a play staged for his amusement. On the other side sat Jasmine Crockett, steady, unflinching, the calm before storm that no one else yet saw coming. Patel wasted no time asserting himself. He interrupted questions with loud sighs, spoke over his colleagues, and tossed out dismissive quips meant to belittle. Each time Crockett began to speak, he leaned forward with a mocking grin, shaking his head, muttering under his breath just loudly enough to draw attention. It was the behavior of a man who believed disruption was strength, arrogance was wit. But Crockett didn't take the bait. She didn't flinch, didn't match his interruptions with raised volume. Instead, she leaned back, folded her hands neatly, and let his performance hang in the air like smoke, obvious, suffocating, impossible to ignore. She knew that sometimes the most devastating response isn't to outshout, but to outlast. The subtle digs began quietly. At first, it was just a raised eyebrow, a pause after one of Patel's smug retorts, as if to say, "That's all you've got?" Then a clipped remark slipped into her phrasing, a line sharpened just enough to sting without appearing deliberate. She dropped facts like stones into water, heavy, undeniable, sending ripples across the chamber. Patel responded with exaggerated scoffs, but for the first time, his laughter carried a hint of edge. The body language told the story before the words ever could. Patel's confident lean slowly shifted forward, his shoulders tightening, his face flushed just slightly under the lights. His palms pressed flat against the table, fingers drumming with restless energy. A bead of sweat traced down from his temple, barely noticeable, but in a room full of cameras, nothing goes unseen. Crockett, meanwhile, remained a study in composure. Her posture was upright, her tone measured, her presence commanding without ever needing to rise above conversational calm. Every time Patel tried to bulldoze over her words, she let the silence linger afterward, reclaiming the air he had tried to steal. The contrast was stark, one man unraveling through overcompensation, one woman holding her ground with unshakable stillness. The crowd in the gallery leaned forward. Reporters who had grown used to Patel's theatrics scribbled faster. Even those who had walked into the hearing distracted began to focus, sensing that the balance of power was shifting in real time. Conversations quieted.
phones tilted upward to record. There was a collective tightening in the room, an instinct that something more than political theater was unfolding. Patel tried harder. His interruptions became sharper, his smirk forced. He repeated the same dismissive phrases, almost word for word, as though he thought sheer volume could erase her precision. But her subtle digs landed like well-placed jabs, knocking rhythm out of his performance. With each exchange, the crowd's anticipation built, not for his words, but for hers. By now, Patel's swagger had transformed into something else, a visible strain to maintain the mask. His forehead glistened, his smirk quivered at the corners. Each time he laughed, the sound rang hollower than before, betraying a man who was no longer amused but unsettled. And across from him sat Crockett, not triumphant, not boastful, but patient, her calm presence drawing him deeper into his own unraveling. The tension was unbearable. Everyone in the chamber felt it, the slow climb of a roller coaster before the plunge. Something was coming, something that would break the standoff wide open. Patel's arrogance had pushed too far, his interruptions too blatant, his smirks too smug. The crowd knew it. Crockett knew it. Even Patel, deep down, must have known it. Something big was about to happen.
It began with silence, a silence so taut it felt like the walls themselves were leaning forward, waiting. Jasmine Crockett had been listening, calmly, deliberately, letting Patel's interruptions hang in the air, letting his smugness display itself without challenge. Every smirk, every dismissive wave of his hand was recorded not just in the minds of those in the chamber, but in the hearts of the viewers watching. He thought he was untouchable. He thought the moment belonged to him. And then Crockett leaned forward, just slightly. A pause, a stillness so sharp it cut the room in half. She looked at him, not with anger, not with visible disdain, but with the composure of someone who knows the truth has already won, and she's simply deciding how to deliver it. That pause was everything. It forced Patel to sit back, blinking, suddenly unsure of what was coming. When she spoke, it was measured, controlled, the words rolling off her tongue with the weight of inevitability. A single line, surgical, precise, devastating. The chamber froze. For a half-second, time itself seemed suspended. You could hear the faint shuffle of papers, the hum of a light overhead, the sound of Patel's breath catching in his throat. His smirk faltered, his jaw tensed. And then the silence shattered. Laughter burst out first, sharp and involuntary, the kind that escapes before decorum can smother it. Gasps followed, hands covering mouths, eyes widening, and then applause, loud, unrestrained, rising like a wave. The chamber, usually bound by rigid formality, could not contain itself. It wasn't just agreement, it was release, a collective exhale after enduring Patel's arrogance for too long. Reporters lunged forward, pens scribbling, keyboards clattering. Cameras zoomed in, flashes catching Patel's face in crisp detail. The shift from cocky amusement to something darker, more unsettled. He tried to smile, but it came off brittle, forced, the grin of a man who knows the mask has slipped. Crockett, by contrast, didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm composure was the exclamation mark. Her silence after the one-liner was louder than any follow-up could have been. She let the room react. She let the truth reverberate. It was more than a clever comeback. It was psychological disarmament. Patel's entire persona, his practiced smirk, his air of superiority, his reputation as a seasoned brawler collapsed under the weight of a single sentence. Years of arrogance were exposed as hollow. In one strike, Crockett revealed the weakness beneath the facade, that his power depended on intimidation, not substance, and when confronted with courage, he had nothing. Imagine being in the audience, watching from home. One moment you're leaning back, shaking your head at Patel's interruptions, feeling the same frustration you've felt countless times watching figures like him dodge and deflect. And then suddenly, Crockett delivers the line. You sit up straighter. Your eyes widen. Maybe you laugh, maybe you clap, even though you're alone in your living room. You reach for your phone. You replay it. Once, twice, 3 times. Then you send it to a friend. You have to see this. Within minutes, Twitter lights up. Someone captions the clip with fire images. Another writes, "Line of the year. Patel never saw it coming." Memes sprout instantly. Patel's stunned face paired with punchlines. Crockett's steady gaze turned into reaction gifs. TikToks loop the line, layering it with music, slow-motion edits, cinematic filters. People aren't just watching. They're participating, turning the moment into culture. But inside the chamber, the reaction was more primal. Some lawmakers covered their faces to hide their laughter. Others leaned back, shaking their heads in disbelief, murmuring to each other. Patel shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his collar, darting his eyes away from Crockett's steady stare. The man who moments earlier commanded the room with smug interruptions now seemed small, diminished, exposed. And here's the brilliance. Crockett didn't just defeat him in argument. She defeated the performance of arrogance. She showed the audience, both in the chamber and across the country, that confidence without integrity is fragile, that it crumbles under the weight of truth spoken with dignity. Her one-liner wasn't just words. It was a mirror held up to Patel, reflecting his weakness for all to see. The energy in the room became electric. You could feel the shift, the crowd no longer merely enduring Patel's arrogance, but reveling in its undoing. Every clap, every laugh, every cheer fed the sense that something bigger was happening. This wasn't just politics, it was theater, it was justice, it was catharsis. And Patel knew it. That was the worst part for him. You could see it in the way he forced himself to sit still, to pretend he hadn't been rattled. But his body betrayed him. The sheen of sweat forming at his temple, the tightening of his jaw, the quickened blink of his eyes. He was unraveling, and the cameras captured every flicker of it. Crockett, by contrast, sat unshaken. Her expression remained composed, even serene, as though she had simply told the truth and was content to let it stand. That composure was the final blow. It underscored the contrast between her dignity and Patel's fragility. The moment traveled in waves. First the chamber, then the phones, then the feeds, then the country. By the end of the night, the clip had been viewed millions of times. Commentators were already debating its significance, labeling it a turning point, a mic drop heard around the nation. But in that room, in that instant, it was something simpler. Justice landing in real time. One pause, one sentence, one eruption. And Patel? He had no response. His arsenal of interruptions, smirks, and dismissals suddenly seemed useless. He sat there, diminished, overshadowed by the echo of Crockett's words. The truth had cut through. And as the cheers continued, one thing became clear. This was not just a moment. It was a reckoning. Because what Jasmine Crockett delivered wasn't only a mic drop. It was a reminder that arrogance, no matter how polished, can be undone by truth delivered with courage. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful weapon in politics isn't volume or bluster. It's a single sentence, spoken at the right time by the right person. The moment Jasmine Crockett delivered her one-liner, it didn't stay contained within the 4 walls of that hearing room. It broke free, carried by gasps, applause, and the dozens of cameras that caught it from every angle. By the time Patel had regained his composure, if he ever truly did, the moment had already taken on a life of its own.
Clips of Crockett's takedown hit the internet within minutes. Twitter feeds lit up like fireworks, timelines scrolling faster than eyes could keep up. The hashtags wrote themselves. Hashtag Crockett Clapback, hashtag Line of the Year, hashtag Patel silenced. Memes flooded the digital landscape before Patel even left his chair. Screenshots of his frozen expression paired with captions like, "That's the face of a man who didn't see it coming." TikToks multiplied, remixing the moment with dramatic music, slow-motion edits, even sports-style commentary breaking down the blow frame by frame. And it wasn't just the usual echo chambers. The clip crossed boundaries, slipping into group chats, Instagram stories, and even late-night comedy monologues. People who normally ignored hearings stopped mid-scroll to watch. Teenagers reenacted the line on TikTok. Comment sections filled with applause emojis, fist bumps, and declarations like, "Finally, someone said it." For once, politics didn't feel abstract or distant. It felt like a cultural event. News commentators pounced almost immediately. Cable networks replayed the moment on loop, analysts dissecting Crockett's poise, Patel's unraveling, and the symbolism of it all. Pundits called it the mic drop of the year, a defining exchange in congressional history, and more than once, the moment arrogance met its match. On podcasts and radio shows, hosts marveled at the precision of Crockett's delivery, how she needed no theatrics, no shouting, just calm conviction that detonated louder than any raised voice could. Supporters were quick to crown it a victory. To them, this wasn't just a clever comeback, it was vindication. For years, they'd watched hearings where arrogance seemed to go unchecked, where deflection triumphed over truth. But in Crockett's one sentence, they saw a reversal. They saw dignity refusing to bow, honesty refusing to be drowned out. Line of the Year became the consensus, a phrase plastered across tweets, memes, and think pieces alike. Of course, Patel's allies scrambled to downplay it. They issued statements calling it grandstanding, accusing Crockett of seeking attention, insisting the line was overhyped. But the speed of the digital wildfire made their protests sound hollow. Every attempt to minimize only highlighted how shaken they were. In the court of public opinion, silence and smirks could no longer mask insecurity. By nightfall, Crockett's words had become more than a political exchange. They had become pop culture. And pop culture doesn't forget. The only question that remained was what Crockett herself would do with the weight of this moment. How she would transform a single sentence into a larger message that reached beyond applause and hashtags. And that answer was coming sooner than anyone expected. When the noise of applause faded, when the memes began to cycle, and when even Patel himself could no longer deny the blow that had landed, Jasmine Crockett did something extraordinary. She refused to let the moment rest as mere entertainment. Instead, she reframed it into something larger, something that stretched beyond the clash of personalities and into the heart of what America tells itself it stands for. Crockett understood that one-liners, however powerful, eventually fade from headlines. What endures is the meaning behind them. And so, in the aftermath, she made clear that this was never about a personal victory or even a partisan exchange. It was about values: dignity over arrogance, truth over deflection, service over self-preservation. Her message was deceptively simple. Arrogance, no matter how loud, cannot withstand truth spoken calmly and with conviction. Smirks and dismissals may buy time, but they cannot buy integrity. She reminded her audience, both in the chamber and across the nation, that standing firm in honesty is not just a political act. It is an act of courage, of self-respect, of patriotism. For those who had watched Patel's swagger unravel, the lesson struck deep. They saw how arrogance, for all its bravado,
collapses when confronted by dignity that does not waver. They saw how silence can be louder than shouting when it follows a sentence that cuts to the core. And they saw in Crockett not just a politician, but a reminder that truth still has defenders, and that those defenders can still win. The emotional climax came not in the takedown itself, but in the reflection it sparked. Viewers weren't left only laughing at Patel's stunned expression. They were left inspired by Crockett's composure. It was the kind of inspiration that makes people look inward, that makes them reconsider their own ability to stand firm in the face of injustice, arrogance, or dismissal. She showed that you don't need to mirror arrogance to defeat it. You only need to embody something stronger. And in that sense, her line became more than a viral moment. It became a parable. A story about the power of one voice, the resilience of truth, and the endurance of dignity. It joined the long tradition of American stories where individuals stood against the odds and proved that integrity could outlast intimidation. From marches to courtrooms to congressional hearings, the thread has always been the same. Resilience is woven into the fabric of progress. Crockett's clash with Patel was not just about her. It was about every teacher who tells the truth in a classroom, every worker who speaks up against unfairness, every community that refuses to be erased. It was about the enduring lesson that power is never truly invincible. It is always vulnerable to truth spoken with courage. And so the story of that day left audiences with more than satisfaction. It left them with responsibility. To remember that democracy is not sustained by smirks and dismissals, but by voices unafraid to demand answers. To remember that every act of standing firm, no matter how small, contributes to the larger story of a nation built not on arrogance, but on resilience. By the time Crockett left the chamber, the applause had already turned into reflection, and the reflection into resolve. People weren't just entertained, they were emboldened. Because dignity had triumphed over arrogance. Truth had silenced corruption, and America, at least for one moment, was reminded of its better self. But the story wasn't finished yet. There was still one final question: how to carry that momentum forward, how to ensure that this spark didn't flicker out, but instead fueled a larger fire. And that is where the audience came in.
One line, that's all it took. One sentence delivered with calm conviction, and the arrogance that had filled the room collapsed into silence. Kash Patel's smirk faded, the crowd erupted, and Jasmine Crockett's words carved themselves into memory. It wasn't just a political exchange. It was proof that truth, when spoken with courage, has the power to cut through even the thickest walls of spin and privilege. But here's the truth that matters most. This story doesn't end in that chamber. It continues with you. Where were you when you first saw that moment flash across your screen? Did you feel the hush in your living room, the shiver in your chest, the surge of satisfaction that comes when dignity finally wins a round? That feeling matters because it's a reminder that accountability belongs to all of us, not just those holding the microphone. If this clash stirred something inside you, if it reminded you why courage matters, why arrogance must be challenged, why dignity deserves the last word, then don't let the moment stop here. Share it. Pass it along to your friends, your family, your coworkers. Let them see what it looks like when truth stands its ground.
And if you want to keep traveling with us through these stories, moments when arrogance is exposed, when resilience shines, when history happens in real time, tap the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell. Be part of the community that refuses to look away, that insists on demanding more, that believes one voice can still make a difference. Because sometimes it only takes one sentence to change everything. And when that sentence is spoken, it deserves to echo.